Some time ago, I decided to go visit a good friend of mine on a university campus. While I was there, I thought, you know what? I'm gonna go catch up with another couple friends of mine who are atheists and see if we can have a good conversation about God, faith, and the big questions of life. And we had a great conversation. And I remember a question one of my friends asked me. He was actually a PhD student in physics. He just looked at me and he said, how can you possibly believe in miracles? And I said, well, tell me why you ask. What's your problem with miracles? And he said, how can you believe in a miracle such as a resurrection, that somebody can rise from the dead, when science shows that people who die stay dead? This student expressed a common belief that many skeptics have, namely that somehow miracles violate the laws of science. As popular as this objection may be, it's based on a misunderstanding of the intersection between science and between faith. Here's why. Scientists aim to explain certain features of the natural world. They do this by observing some patterns and then drawing the most natural inference. In this case, when people die, they stay dead. Death is final. But the resurrection is not a claim that Jesus rose naturally. The resurrection is a claim that Jesus rose supernaturally, that God stepped into the world, He stepped into history to perform a miracle, namely the raising of Jesus from the dead, which was the effect which could not have happened if the world was left to operate according to its normal processes alone. This student was dismissing that any powers beyond the natural world could act within the natural world. He limited explanations for things we see in the world to the regular patterns we observe around us. But this is a mistaken way of thinking. And in fact, it brings us quite obviously to the duck-billed platypus. At the end of the 18th century, the Western world first encountered the duck-billed platypus. It's a rabbit-sized, furry animal that lays eggs. It's got a duck bill, quite obviously because of its name. It has webbed feet, and it's native to Australia. If you happen to see one, be careful and watch out for its venomous claw. Back then, Europeans were stunned even at the sight of a hide of a platypus. Many refused to believe that such an animal was possible. But it wasn't until 1884 when a platypus mother was shot and she had just given birth. And then they found another egg inside of her. It was only at that point that some people began to believe. Why were so many people, including many scientists, hesitant to believe? The problem was not a lack of evidence. They had the fur and the testimony of their colleagues who had seen the platypus. You see, the problem was on the level of their worldview, their belief system about reality. You see, their worldview said either you have mammals who give birth to live young, or you have reptiles who lay eggs. It's not possible to have a mammal who lays eggs. And in this case, when they were presented with evidence for that very thing, because of their worldview, they dismissed it outright. This is how many people approach the miraculous. If they haven't seen it, and it doesn't fit certain preconceived categories, then they dismiss it. It must be a hoax, even when presented with evidence for miracles. Because of assumptions from their worldview, many people simply don't even consider that it could be true. And in fact, they leave no room for the supernatural. That's why the question of the possibility of miracles really depends upon the existence of God. If God doesn't exist, then of course miracles are impossible. But if God does exist, then miracles can happen. And this puts a huge burden of proof upon the skeptic. The skeptic actually has to show that God doesn't exist, because if He even just possibly exists, then the miraculous can happen. So here's the bottom line. Just as the scientists in the day of the platypus needed to be willing to follow evidence when it took them outside of their preconceived ideas, today skeptics need to be open to the evidence for the miraculous and to follow the evidence wherever it leads. But not only are miracles possible, we have good reason to believe that miracles actually happen today. Whenever I speak to Christian audiences, I often ask a question. I'll simply ask the question, how many of you have seen or personally experienced the miraculous? And I don't mean like you're going shopping during Christmas season and you happen to get a lucky parking spot. I mean a supernatural miracle that can't be explained purely in natural terms. And every time I do it, dozens of hands go up. Friends, there are tons of living Christians today who believe they have seen and experienced miracles and are willing to testify to that fact. In his massive academic study on miracles, New Testament scholar Craig Keener notes that there are hundreds of millions of Christians today, that's right, hundreds of millions, who believe they have personally experienced or witnessed miracles. The deaf being able to hear, the blind regaining sight, and the lame being able to walk. There are even cases reported of the dead coming back to life. Professor Keener carefully and meticulously documents these in his 2-volume set on miracles. There's simply no good reason to dismiss the possibility of miracles before examining the evidence. And there is good reason to believe, as we have seen with so many testimonies, that miracles actually happen still today. Talking about miracles can raise a lot of questions. Why does God perform some miracles, but not others? Even in my own life, there's times that I've prayed and not seen the answer that I was praying for. And that can bring doubts and that can bring questions. But here's what I do know. I know that we worship a God who is powerful. And as Psalm 77 says, which you will see in this week's verse, we worship and follow a God who performs wonders today. This is a God who performs miracles.